how can we encourage and accelerate that step, that change in Japanese society? In this sense, Japan withdrawing, at least for a time, from high seas whaling to kill whales in its own waters, concerning though that is, given the fragile population status of those very whales, does make Japan's policy and practices more visible and relevant to Japan's own public. It puts a direct conflict between the killing of whales in the 21st century and the steady emergence of a whale and dolphin watching industry right around the coast of Japan. So, looking at this in a sort of glass half full perspective, Japan now will have to explain to its own public and policymakers why it makes sense to continue this outmoded practice, why they should continue to subsidize it with their tax money, and hopefully, wrapped inside this defiant announcement and bravado of we're taking our harpoons and we're leaving the IWC, is a quiet recognition in Tokyo that Japan needs to reconcile itself to the emerging international consensus for whale conservation in the 21st century. And some of us dare to hope that what we're actually seeing here is a face-saving way out of the whaling industry. If it's not that, if it's a tactical retreat, the implications are almost too horrific and immense to calculate. Japan has been a leader in international environmental cooperation, and whether it's at the UN or climate change negotiations that started in Kyoto, has prided itself as a responsible member of the international community. If they have taken the calculus that they can do whatever they want when it comes to whaling, if so great a nation has decided to chart its own course toward the resuscitation of commercial whaling on the high seas in coming decades, doing this work, you have to be an optimist, but that would be the end. If that, in fact, is what we're seeing play out. And it's both the joy and the frustration of this work that we won't know. We won't know, perhaps for a generation. Individuals, governments, organizations, advocacy groups like IFAW, need to find and strike a balance of persistent, respectful international pressure, encouragement of a shifting domestic attitude toward whales and whaling, and respectful interaction with Japanese government officials. I tell friends and colleagues, ending Japan's whaling is going to require more low bows and fewer low blows. Ham-fisted campaigning by well-meaning Western NGOs has arguably perpetrated the whaling industry. And solving this riddle, solving this challenge is somehow finding a way for a conservation-oriented approach to flourish in Japan. In the survey work and market research that we've done with Japanese partners, time and again what we see is that Japan's public is not pro-whaling per se. They are anti-whaling. And well-meaning, but sometimes culturally inept campaigning from Western NGOs has arguably perpetuated an industry. It's given a caricature or target for the dwindling number of apologists at the Japan Fisheries Agency who are eager for budgetary reasons and other reasons to sort of whip up culture and nationalism in defense of an industry that really doesn't belong in the 21st century. So it's important for misty-eyed whale huggers like me, governments, and other stakeholders to strike a balance of firm and unrelenting pressure and encouragement of Japan. And we need to just forthrightly, with a smile, reject any argument that somehow Japan is incapable of the transition that the United States and the UK and Latin American countries and Australia and New Zealand, after decimating the world's whale populations in commercial whaling, made the decision to strike a different relationship with these creatures for the future. And to suggest that Japan is incapable of that transition is bunk. Some of the campaigns that have been, the dwindling number of apologists for whaling in Tokyo have consciously married their cause to a nationalist political and cultural agenda to whip up support for an outmoded industry that your average Japanese isn't even aware of, let alone interested in. And as we campaign in the future to continue to encourage change by Japan and the cessation of whaling in its coastal waters, we need to not just be aware of those cultural sensitivities, but if we can, working with Japanese stakeholders, harness that sensibility, that pride in nation, to encourage and accelerate a generational shift that is already happening in Tokyo and across Japan, that puts Japan among the modern nations who have put down the harpoon, picked up the camera, and ended this cruel practice in the 21st century. Now, whale and dolphin watching worldwide is one of the most rapidly growing sectors of the ecotourism market. And hundreds of millions of people every year are pursuing whale and dolphin watching. And ironically, that is the case in Japan, where from the northern nature island of Hokkaido down to the southern islands of Okinawa, you can watch whales around Japan at some time during the year, year-round. It's spectacular, the number of species that you can see.
We have about 3 minutes on.
Whale and dolphin watching is growing dramatically around the world. Our organization has undertaken several global studies now, one in 2001, 2010. It's one of the most rapidly growing forms of ecotourism. And that's true in Japan as well. If you go whale watching in Japan, the cultural response of the Japanese is when the whale leaps out of the water, they all applaud. I mean, it's exciting and very moving to go whale watching in Japan. And from the northern nature island of Hokkaido to southern islands off of Okinawa, at some time during the year, you can go whale watching and dolphin watching around Japan, and it is a world-class experience because of the volcanic